She was a woman who lived a very simple life. Even though she was married to one of the richest men in the country, nothing about her personality showed pride, arrogance, or the desire to display wealth. To the world, she looked ordinary, almost unnoticed in a crowd. She wore plain clothes, simple shoes, and often carried only a small handbag with the few things she needed. She did not wear much jewelry, sometimes only a small ring on her finger, and even that looked so modest that people rarely guessed it had any meaning beyond sentimental value. This simplicity was not because she did not have access to riches. Her husband owned many hotels, properties, and businesses. His name was famous in newspapers and television channels. He was known as a billionaire who could buy anything he wanted. But his wife had a very different heart. She grew up in a small town where people cared less about looks and more about honesty. From childhood, she had been taught that money could bring comfort but not true respect or love. Because of that, even after marrying a man of such high status, she never changed her lifestyle. She preferred to wake up early, cook her own breakfast, and water the small plants in her garden. She loved reading books, walking to nearby markets, and talking with ordinary people. She never liked to be treated as special, so she avoided situations where people bowed down or acted extra polite just because of her husband's name. Many people in her husband's social circle never understood her. They expected her to wear expensive clothes, drive luxury cars, and host glamorous parties. But she smiled politely and stayed the way she always had been. Her husband admired this quality more than anything else. In a world where everyone wanted to show off wealth, he found her humility refreshing. When he first met her, she had no idea about his background. She only knew he was hardworking, kind, and honest. Later, when she discovered his true status, she was not shocked, nor did she try to change her attitude toward him. This honesty and purity attracted him, and he realized she was the woman he wanted by his side for life. Their marriage was not a union of wealth and power, it was a bond of understanding. She supported him quietly, encouraged him during stressful business times, and never demanded unnecessary luxuries. He often told his close friends, "My wife is my biggest treasure, not my money." Still, because she was not always seen in the public eye, many people did not know much about her. Some who saw her in public thought she was just an ordinary visitor, a teacher, or a housewife with no connection to the billionaire world. One day, while her husband was away for meetings in another city, she decided to do something different. She thought about visiting one of his hotels. The idea came to her while she was sitting at home, sipping tea. She remembered how her husband always insisted that his hotels treated guests with warmth, respect, and professionalism. He often said, every guest should feel like royalty, whether they come in a suit or in simple clothes. She wondered if that was true in reality. Did the staff really follow those words? Or were they just polite when they recognized someone wealthy? She decided she would go as a normal guest, not revealing who she was. Her plan was simple: she would arrive at the hotel, book a room, and experience everything like a regular customer. She was curious to see how staff behaved with people who did not look rich. She did not wear her finest dress or carry designer bags. Instead, she wore a plain cotton outfit, tied her hair in a simple bun, and carried only a small leather handbag. She looked no different from any middle-class woman who might stop at a hotel for rest. When she arrived at the Grand Hotel, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The building stood tall and shining, with glass windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Expensive cars lined the entrance, and doormen in uniform stood proudly by the doors. Guests in elegant clothes walked in and out, some carrying designer shopping bags, others speaking on their phones in different languages. She stepped out of the small taxi she had taken and slowly walked toward the entrance. Her heart beat a little faster as she thought about what was going to happen inside. The lobby was stunning. Huge chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the marble floor gleamed so brightly that she could see her reflection. A fountain in the center of the hall made soft splashing sounds, and the air smelled faintly of flowers. She paused for a moment, taking it all in. Though she had visited her husband's hotels many times before with him, this time it felt different. She was not entering as the wife of the owner but as an unknown woman. She walked to the reception desk where two young employees were talking quietly to each other. Their smiles faded slightly as they looked at her. She greeted them politely and asked if she could book a room for the night. Her voice was soft but confident. For a second, the employees looked at her plain dress, her simple handbag, and the taxi driver who had just driven away. Instead of responding warmly, they exchanged glances and tried to hide small smirks. "Do you know how much the rooms cost here?" one of them asked in a tone that sounded more like a challenge than a question. She smiled gently and replied, "Yes, I would like to book one." She did not argue or show irritation. But she noticed the doubt in their eyes. The employees whispered again to each other before one of them leaned forward and said, "We don't think this place is suitable for you. Maybe you should try a smaller hotel nearby." The words pierced her heart. She stood still, wondering if she had heard them correctly. She repeated her request, explaining that she wanted a standard room and was ready to pay. But instead of helping her, they laughed lightly and told her the hotel was fully booked, even though she could clearly see available room numbers on the screen in front of them. Other guests nearby turned their heads to look at her, some with pity, others with curiosity. She felt her face grow warm, not with anger but with quiet hurt. She had not expected such treatment. Still, she remained calm. She thanked them softly and stepped away from the counter. Inside, she felt the weight of humiliation pressing on her chest. She thought of her husband's words about treating every guest with dignity, and she realized those words had not been followed by his own staff. She walked out of the lobby slowly, her mind full of thoughts. She could have easily revealed who she was and demanded respect, but that was not her nature. Instead, she took out her phone and dialed her husband's number. When he answered, she told him gently about everything that had happened, leaving out no detail. On the other end, there was silence for a few seconds, and then his voice grew firm. He told her not to worry and promised he would take care of everything. She ended the call and sat quietly on a bench outside the hotel, watching the cars come and go. She did not cry, but her heart felt heavy. She thought of how many other simple people might have faced the same humiliation at places like this. She also thought of her husband, how disappointed he would be to learn that his hotel did not reflect the values he believed in. She had no idea that this small visit of hers would soon create a scene that no one in the hotel would ever forget. The woman sat on the bench for a while, her mind filled with heavy thoughts. She had never imagined such a simple request just to book a room would turn into such a hurtful experience. The proud building stood in front of her, tall and shining, but the warmth and respect that her husband always spoke about seemed absent inside. She replayed the words of the receptionists in her mind, and each time it made her heart ache. They had looked at her as if she was less, as if she did not belong there. She could have left right away, gone back home, and forgotten everything. But something inside her refused to walk away so easily. She wanted to see how far they would go in treating her like someone unworthy. With this thought, she stood up and decided to walk back inside. She wanted to try one more time, maybe at another counter, or perhaps with another staff member. When she entered the lobby again, the chandeliers were still glowing brightly, and the polished marble still reflected the footsteps of wealthy guests. But for her, the place no longer carried beauty. It felt cold, almost unwelcoming. She noticed the same employees at the desk glance at her, whispering to each other again. Their expressions carried a mix of disbelief and mockery, as if they could not understand why she had returned. She approached the desk once more and politely asked if she could speak to a manager. The receptionist raised an eyebrow and crossed his arms, his lips curling into a half smile that did not look kind. "Why do you need to meet the manager?" he asked in a tone that suggested he already knew the answer. She calmly replied, "I only want to discuss booking a room." Instead of helping her, he turned to his colleague and muttered something that made them both chuckle. Then he looked back at her and said, "Our rooms are not for everyone. Even if you could pay, we don't think this is the right place for you." Her heart sank deeper at those words. It was not just about denying her a room anymore, it was about insulting her dignity. The way they looked at her, the way they spoke to her, it was clear they had judged her only by her appearance. She wore simple clothes, carried no luxury bag, and came in a taxi instead of a private car. To them, this was enough reason to treat her as someone undeserving. She stood there quietly for a moment, her eyes fixed on the desk. Then, without raising her voice, she said, "I understand. Thank you for your time." She turned and began walking away, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. As she moved toward the exit, she noticed two other guests, a middle-aged couple watching her with curiosity. The woman among them gave her a small sympathetic smile, but the man simply shook his head, as if to say, "That's how the world works." Their silent reaction stung even more. It reminded her that many people accepted this kind of behavior as normal. Outside the lobby doors, she stepped into the open air again. The evening sun had begun to set, and golden light spread across the street. She walked to a quieter corner near the garden that bordered the hotel. She needed a moment to breathe. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone. She dialed her husband's number again. When he picked up, she spoke softly, almost as if she did not want her voice to break. She told him the full story, this time the mocking looks, the hurtful words, the denial, and the humiliation. She explained how they had laughed when she asked for a room and how they made her feel like she did not belong. She tried to keep her tone steady, but her husband could sense the pain behind her words. On the other end of the line, his silence was louder than anything else. He was a man who usually chose his words carefully, but this time, he could not remain calm. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and controlled but filled with an edge of anger she rarely heard from him. "Wait for me there," he said firmly. "Don't go anywhere. I will be there soon." She tried to tell him not to trouble himself, that she would come home instead, but he interrupted her gently. "No, my love. Stay where you are. I need to see this for myself." She put the phone down and sat on the garden bench, staring at the ground. She wondered if she had done the right thing by calling him. She did not want him to feel upset, but at the same time, she knew he deserved to know the truth. He had always believed that his hotels were places of comfort and dignity. Yet here she was, his own wife, being denied a room like a stranger unworthy of stepping inside. As she waited, she thought about her husband's journey. He had built everything with his own hands, starting from a small hotel years ago. Back then, he treated every guest like family, because he knew how it felt to be ignored or looked down upon. That memory pushed him to create a chain of hotels where service came before profit. And now, his vision had been destroyed in front of her eyes. She knew this incident would hurt him deeply. Minutes passed slowly. The sound of cars pulling in and out of the hotel filled the air. She watched as wealthy guests entered, their expensive clothes shining under the lights, their luggage carried by eager bellboys. None of them noticed her sitting quietly in the garden. To them, she was invisible. Finally, she saw a familiar black car approach the entrance. Her heart jumped slightly. The driver stepped out quickly to open the door, and then her husband emerged. Tall, confident, and dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, he walked with a commanding presence. People in the lobby immediately recognized him. Some whispered his name, others straightened their posture in respect. She stood up slowly, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, she felt relief. He came straight to her, his expression softening as he saw her sitting alone on the bench. He reached for her hand, held it gently, and asked, "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her eyes revealed the truth. He turned his gaze toward the shining building in front of them. His jaw tightened, and his eyes grew sharp. Without wasting another second, he held her hand and walked firmly toward the lobby doors. The staff inside, who had moments ago mocked her, now rushed to bow their heads and greet him with wide smiles. They straightened their ties, adjusted their posture, and put on the politest voices they could find. But it was too late. The woman stayed quiet beside him as they entered. The same receptionists who had denied her a room now looked pale and nervous, their fake smiles trembling. They knew they were standing in front of the owner himself. He stopped at the desk, his hand still holding hers, and looked directly at the employees. His voice, calm yet cutting, broke the silence of the lobby. "A woman came here earlier asking for a room. Do you remember her?" The employees exchanged terrified glances. One of them cleared his throat and muttered, "Yes, sir, but we didn't realize." He did not let them finish. He tightened his grip on his wife's hand and said clearly, "This woman is my wife. She asked for a room, and you judged her by her clothes, by her taxi, by your shallow eyes. You humiliated her. Tell me, are these the values of my hotel?" The entire lobby fell silent. Guests nearby stopped to watch, stunned by the scene unfolding in front of them. The staff at the desk stood frozen, unable to find an answer. His words carried weight, and his anger was not hidden anymore. His wife, still quiet, watched him speak. She could see the fire in his eyes, but behind it was the deep pain of betrayal. For him, this was not only about her treatment, it was about everything he stood for. And in that moment, the staff realized that their careless actions had not only insulted a woman in plain clothes, they had insulted the very heart of the empire they worked for. The lobby stood still as the man's words echoed through the shining hall. Every guest, every staff member, and even those who had only come in for a moment of business paused in silence. No one expected the calm and gentle woman who had been turned away earlier to be the wife of the very man who owned the entire hotel. The receptionists who had mocked her only hours ago stood frozen, their faces pale, their hands trembling on the counter. The woman lowered her eyes, feeling the weight of the scene. She had not wished for such a moment. She never wanted people to bow before her or fear her husband. Her intention had only been to see how staff treated guests, not to create a storm. Yet, now that the truth had come out, there was no way back. Her husband's expression was firm, his eyes fixed on the staff as if searching their souls. He was not a man who raised his voice often, but when he spoke with quiet anger, it carried more power than 100 shouts. "You saw her," he said, his voice calm yet sharp. "She came here with respect, with trust, and asked for a room. You laughed at her. You turned her away. Tell me, what kind of service is this?" The employees could not answer. Their lips moved but no sound came. They looked at each other helplessly, hoping someone would find words, but none could. The truth was too heavy. The guests standing nearby stared with wide eyes, some whispering among themselves. Many of them looked at the woman with new respect, realizing that her simplicity was not weakness, it was strength. The billionaire took a step closer to the desk. His voice grew even colder, but his control never left him. "I built this place with one rule, that every guest is to be treated with dignity, whether they come in gold or in rags. You broke that rule today. You thought money defines who deserves respect. That is not what I built this empire for." The woman gently touched his hand, trying to calm him. She whispered, "It's enough. Let it go." But he shook his head softly, replying, "No, my love. If we let this pass, they will treat someone else tomorrow the same way." The manager of the hotel, who had been alerted by the commotion, rushed to the lobby. He bowed nervously, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "Sir, I apologize for what has happened. I did not know," his words stumbled, and he struggled to finish his sentence. Her husband turned to him with steady eyes. You did not know because you did not care. Do you run this place only for those who look wealthy? Do you train your staff to measure a person's worth by their clothes? Then what is this hotel? A palace for the proud? Or a shelter for the honored? The manager lowered his head in shame. Guests around the lobby nodded quietly, many agreeing with the man's words. Some of them had faced moments in their own lives where they had been judged unfairly, and they felt his anger as their own. The woman stood beside her husband, her heart pounding. She was proud of him, but at the same time, she felt the sting of the memory return. She remembered how helpless she felt when the receptionist laughed at her, how her dignity had been crushed in front of strangers. She had kept quiet then, but now her husband was giving her voice. The staff who had insulted her tried to speak at last. One of them whispered, "We're sorry, madam, we didn't realize," but her husband raised his hand and stopped him. You didn't realize because you didn't want to. You looked at her and saw only her clothes, her bag, her taxi. But you never saw her as a human being. That is the worst mistake you can make in this business or in life. He then turned to his wife. His voice softened when he looked at her, as if the whole world disappeared in that moment. You are the reason I built these hotels. I wanted places where people would feel safe, respected, and valued. And yet, they dared to humiliate you here. How can I forgive that? Her eyes grew moist. She shook her head gently and whispered, I don't need revenge. I only wanted to know the truth. But her husband could not stand still. He called the manager closer and, in front of everyone, gave a decision. These staff members will not work here another day. Respect cannot be taught to those who do not carry it in their hearts. I want them replaced immediately. And let this be a lesson to every person in this building, you will never judge a guest by appearances again. If I hear of such behavior once more, you will answer to me directly. The weight of his words spread across the hall like a storm. The dismissed staff members lowered their heads, too ashamed to look at anyone. The manager nodded quickly, promising to follow the order without delay. The woman, though still quiet, felt her chest lighten slightly. She had not wanted anyone to lose their livelihood, but she also knew her husband was right. If people were allowed to treat guests with arrogance, the hotel's name would eventually crumble. Sometimes, a strict decision was necessary for the greater good. After the confrontation, her husband led her to one of the most luxurious suites in the hotel. The staff, now filled with guilt and fear, rushed to serve her with the utmost care. But she did not feel joy in their sudden respect. She knew it was not genuine, it was born of fear, not kindness. She thought about all the ordinary people who would never have the chance to call the owner of the hotel when they were mistreated. Her heart ached for them. As they entered the suite, her husband turned to her and said, I am sorry you had to face this. It should never have happened, not to you, not to anyone. She placed her hand on his arm and gave him a gentle smile. You don't need to apologize. It is not your fault. But I hope this teaches them, and maybe others too, that respect is not about wealth. That night, the couple sat together by the large window overlooking the city lights. They talked for hours, not about money or business, but about values. She reminded him of his early days, when he served tea to guests himself, making sure even the poorest traveler felt welcomed. He nodded quietly, lost in thought. I had forgotten how easy it is for people to forget humility, he admitted. But today reminded me again. I will never allow this in any of my hotels. The woman leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, that is why I love you. Because your heart is not for wealth, it is for people. As the city lights glittered below them, the pain of the day slowly turned into a deeper understanding. The humiliation she had faced was real, but so was the lesson it carried. It was not just a story about one woman being denied a room. It was about every person who has ever been judged unfairly, every guest who has been treated poorly because they didn't look the part. And with her husband's decision, she knew change would come not only for this hotel but for every hotel that carried his name. By the end of the night, she felt peace again. She had been reminded that while the world often judged by appearances, true worth could never be measured by clothes, jewelry, or cars. It was measured by kindness, respect, and the ability to see people for who they truly were. And that was a lesson she hoped would echo in the halls of the hotel for many years to come. The next morning arrived quietly. The city outside the hotel buzzed with life as cars honked, people hurried to their offices, and shopkeepers opened their stores. But inside the hotel, a storm of silence and fear had already settled. The incident from the night before had spread like fire among the staff. Every worker in the building knew what had happened to the simple woman who turned out to be the owner's wife. Whispers ran through the hallways, in the kitchen, and even among the cleaning staff. Everyone knew that the billionaire himself had walked in with his wife and publicly exposed the behavior of his employees. The woman woke up early, as she always did, even in the grand suite. She stood by the tall glass window, watching the city lights fade into morning brightness. The bed was large and comfortable, the curtains soft and heavy, the air perfectly cool, but none of it gave her peace. Her mind returned again and again to the humiliation she had faced in the very same building. She touched the glass softly with her fingers and thought about all the strangers who might have been denied entry just like her, only because they looked ordinary. Her husband walked over to her, his expression thoughtful. He had not slept much either. His anger from the night before had not cooled, instead, it had turned into determination. "Today," he said firmly, "things will change." She turned to him, her eyes filled with both concern and admiration. "Don't be too harsh," she said softly. "Sometimes people make mistakes out of ignorance, not out of cruelty." He looked at her with love, but also with resolve. "My love, mistakes can be forgiven once. But what they did was more than a mistake, it was disrespect. And if I do not act now, then tomorrow another person will suffer the same insult. I cannot allow that." She nodded slowly, understanding his point. She had always admired his sense of justice, even when it meant making tough decisions. He was not a man who ruled with fear, but with fairness. Still, she worried about the weight of what was to come. By mid-morning, he had called for a special meeting in the hotel's conference hall. Every manager, supervisor, and senior staff member was ordered to attend. The air in the room was thick with tension as employees sat quietly, waiting for him to arrive. Many of them had never seen him this way before. They were used to his calm visits, his encouraging words, and his inspiring speeches. But today was different. Today they were about to face a man whose trust had been broken. When he entered the hall, the entire room stood up instantly. He gestured for them to sit, his face serious. His wife accompanied him, sitting quietly at the side, her presence a silent reminder of why they were all gathered. He began speaking, his voice clear and steady. "Last night, my wife came to this hotel. She came not as my wife, not as the owner's companion, but as a guest. A simple guest, like anyone else who might walk through those doors. And what happened? She was insulted. She was denied. She was laughed at. Why? Because she looked simple. Because she did not wear expensive clothes or carry a designer bag. Because she came in a taxi instead of a luxury car." His words cut through the silence like sharp glass. No one dared to move. Many lowered their heads in shame, while others stared at him with wide eyes, knowing the weight of his disappointment. He continued, his tone firm but controlled. "This is not just about my wife. This is about every person who has ever been treated unfairly because of appearances. We built these hotels on a promise that every guest, rich or poor, would be treated with dignity. But you have broken that promise. And if we break this promise, then we are nothing more than walls of stone and glass. We are not a home. We are not a sanctuary. We are only a marketplace of pride. He paused, letting his words sink in. His wife watched him, her heart swelling with both pride and sadness. She had never seen him so passionate, so determined to protect the values he held dear. Then he announced his decision. The staff members directly responsible for this incident will no longer be part of this company. They failed not only a guest but the very soul of our service. Let this be a lesson: arrogance has no place in our halls. Gasps ran through the room. Though many had expected strict action, hearing it out loud felt heavy. But he was not finished. He looked around at all of them and said, "And to the rest of you, let this be clear: from this day forward, no one will ever be judged by their appearance in my hotels. Every employee, from the reception desk to the kitchen, will undergo training, again training not in skills, but in respect. We will remind ourselves why we are here. We are here to serve with dignity, not with pride." The room was filled with silence, but this time it was a silence of reflection. Many employees nodded quietly, realizing the truth in his words. Some even felt grateful, for it was a reminder of values they had slowly forgotten in the rush of luxury and business. After the meeting, he walked out with his wife by his side. The atmosphere in the hotel had changed. Guests whispered to each other about what had happened, and many admired him for standing up for what was right. The woman, though still quiet, felt a strange sense of comfort. She knew her humiliation had turned into something greater, a lesson for everyone. Later that afternoon, the couple sat together in the hotel's private lounge. He held her hand gently and asked, "Do you feel better now?" She looked at him and smiled softly. "I feel better because I know you care not only for me, but for every guest who walks in here. You turned my pain into a message." He leaned back, his eyes thoughtful. "I don't want anyone to walk into my hotels and feel small. Whether they are rich or poor, dressed simply or grandly, they must all feel welcome. That is the true meaning of hospitality." She nodded, her heart warm. She knew this moment would stay with them forever. What began as a simple visit had become a turning point, not only for the hotel but for everyone who worked in it. That evening, as they prepared to leave, many guests approached the woman with kind smiles. Some even stopped to say, "You taught them a lesson they will never forget." She smiled politely, not feeling proud of herself, but grateful that the truth had come out. When they finally stepped outside, the sun was setting again, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. The air was cool, and the city lights began to sparkle. She held her husband's arm as they walked to their car. She thought of how strange life could be. A woman dressed simply had been turned away, but that same woman had also changed an entire hotel's future. Her husband opened the car door for her and said gently, "Sometimes life tests us in unexpected ways. Yesterday, they tested you. Today, they tested me. And together, we gave them the answer." She smiled, her heart full. As the car drove away, she looked back at the hotel one last time. The building still stood tall and shining, but now it carried a new meaning. It was no longer just a symbol of wealth. It had become a reminder of dignity, respect, and the power of standing up for what is right. The days that followed were full of change. What began as one woman's painful experience soon became a lesson for many. News of the incident spread far beyond the hotel walls. Guests who had witnessed the confrontation told their friends, and within a short time, the story was being shared across the city. People were surprised to learn that the simple woman turned away by the staff was in fact the wife of the billionaire owner. But what surprised them more was not her identity, it was the way her husband had reacted. Most people in power cared only for reputation and profit, but here was a man who stood in front of everyone and defended respect over wealth. The story touched the hearts of many. Some said, "He is not just a businessman, he is a man of values." Others admired the woman herself, who remained calm and gentle even when insulted. Her quiet strength became a symbol for those who had ever been judged unfairly. Inside the hotel, everything changed. Staff members walked more carefully, spoke more politely, and began to look at every guest with new eyes. Training sessions were held daily, not only about duties but about humanity. The woman sometimes watched quietly from a distance. She saw receptionists who once smirked at simple guests now greeting them warmly, offering water, and treating them as equals to the wealthiest visitors. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her experience had awakened something important. Her husband, meanwhile, was determined to make sure this change was not temporary. He sent messages to all his hotels across the country, reminding them of the same rule: dignity first, profit second. No guest shall ever leave feeling small, his message said. Managers everywhere took it seriously, fearing his disappointment but also inspired by his conviction. At home, life returned to its usual calmness, but the memory of that day stayed with the couple. Sometimes, while sipping tea in the garden, the woman would reflect on how everything unfolded. She thought about the moment she was denied a room, the humiliation she felt, and the way her husband turned it into justice. She realized life had given her a test, and through it, she had helped bring light to others. Her husband often told her, "You don't realize how powerful you are. Without saying a harsh word, you changed hearts." She would smile softly and reply, "It was not me, it was the truth." People cannot run away from the truth forever. One evening, a letter arrived at their home. It was from one of the former staff members who had been dismissed. The letter was long, filled with regret and apology. The person admitted their mistake and wrote about how they had judged her unfairly. They wrote, "I did not only lose my job that day, I lost my dignity. But your calmness and kindness opened my eyes. I promise never to treat another person the way I treated you. Thank you for teaching me a lesson that no book or training ever could." Reading the letter brought tears to the woman's eyes. She showed it to her husband, who nodded quietly. "Perhaps," he said, "losing the job was painful for them, but maybe it was also the beginning of their growth. Sometimes people need a fall to rise better." She agreed and felt a quiet hope that the person would truly change. Over time, whenever the woman visited one of the hotels, she noticed a difference in the way staff behaved. They no longer measured people by their clothes, cars, or jewelry. They spoke to each guest with genuine warmth. She even saw staff helping simple travelers with extra care, making sure they felt at home. She realized the lesson had spread far beyond that one lobby. It had become part of the company's culture. Her husband often reminded his team, "We are not here to shine with marble and chandeliers. We are here to shine with respect." Those words became a slogan quietly repeated among employees, and slowly, the hotels became known not just for luxury but for heart. Guests began to say, "It doesn't matter who you are, in his hotels, you will always feel valued." The woman herself continued to live as simply as before. She still wore her plain cotton dresses, tied her hair modestly, and carried her small handbag. But wherever she went, people looked at her differently now. They no longer saw just a simple woman, they saw a woman who carried dignity in her silence. Some even whispered to their children, "That is the lady who taught everyone not to judge by appearances." She never sought fame or recognition, but she accepted their kindness with a gentle smile. Months later, the hotel chain received an award for excellence in hospitality. Reporters asked the billionaire what had inspired such a strong change in service. He stood proudly on stage, holding his wife's hand, and said, "The honor belongs to her. She reminded me, and all of us, that wealth is nothing if we cannot give respect. She came to one of my hotels dressed as herself, simple and modest, and she was denied. That moment broke my heart. But it also gave us all a lesson. Today, we are better because of her." The audience applauded, and the woman blushed quietly, lowering her eyes as always. She never enjoyed attention, but she felt grateful that the truth was reaching so many people. Life carried on, but the memory of that day never faded. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit with her husband on the balcony, looking at the stars. He would ask her, "Do you ever regret going to the hotel that day?" She would smile gently and answer, "No. Because that day gave us a chance to correct what was wrong. If I had not gone, the truth would have stayed hidden." He would then take her hand and whisper, "And you reminded me why I fell in love with you. Not for beauty, not for wealth, but for the purity of your heart." Their bond grew even stronger after the incident. They realized once more that love was not about grand displays but about standing by each other in both pain and pride. She had faced humiliation, but he had turned it into respect. Together, they had turned one sad moment into a movement of change. Years later, guests still told the story of the simple woman at the Billionaire's hotel. It became a tale parents shared with their children, a reminder to never judge others by appearances. Some even called it the story that gave dignity back to the ordinary. And for the woman herself, she never let the incident change her simplicity. She continued to live humbly, caring for her plants, cooking her meals, and reading her books. But inside, she carried the quiet strength of someone who had faced judgment and turned it into light for others. Her husband never stopped admiring her. Whenever he introduced her to others, he would smile and say, "She may look simple, but she is the strongest woman I know." And he meant it with every part of his heart. In the end, the hotel continued to shine not just with marble floors and crystal lights, but with the glow of respect. Guests came from all over the world, rich and poor, and left with the same feeling that they were seen, valued, and respected. And it all began with one woman, in plain clothes, carrying a small handbag, who walked into a hotel one afternoon and was denied a room.